the swing in the backyard of 412 Clover Ridge Road, Shenandoah County, Virginia still moved on the morning of September 14, 2009. Not because a child sat upon it, not because the wind was blowing. It moved because some residue of ordinary life had only just departed. The plastic seat twisted slightly on its chain, and then slowly it went still. The toy truck beside the garden bed lay on its side in the grass, its red paint catching the early light. A half-eaten peanut butter and honey sandwich sat on a paper plate on the back porch steps. The glass of apple juice beside it had not yet warmed in the September sun. Olivia Hayes, 6 years old, brown hair and 2 uneven pigtails, a small scar above her left eyebrow from a tumble off a bicycle the previous spring. She was gone. Her mother, 31-year-old Sandra Hayes, had stepped inside their house for what she would later describe to Shenandoah County Sheriff's deputies as no more than 4 minutes. Her father, 34-year-old Dale Hayes, a floor supervisor at a lumber processing facility in Strasburg, had left for his shift at 6:15 that morning. Their daughter had eaten breakfast. She had gone out to play in the familiar green yard she had always played in, and then, in the span of 4 minutes, or perhaps a few more, she had ceased to be findable. For 13 years, Olivia Hayes would be a face on a laminated poster, a photograph reprinted in newspapers every September on the anniversary of her disappearance, a name spoken in hushed conversations at church potlucks and community meetings in the small towns of the Shenandoah Valley. She would become the reason parents in 3 counties began watching their children with a new and exhausting vigilance. Clear's throat. But the question that would haunt this case for more than a decade, the question that investigators, family members, neighbors, and the people of Shenandoah County could not answer, was not simply where Olivia had gone. It was whether the person who knew exactly where she was had been standing in front of them the entire time. To understand what happened on September 14, 2009, you have to first understand Clover Ridge Road. It was the kind of street where children still rode bicycles until their mothers called them in for supper. It was the kind of neighborhood where people left their garage doors open on Saturday mornings and waved from their driveways. Shenandoah County, tucked between the Blue Ridge and Massanutten Mountains, was a place of tremendous quiet beauty, rolling farmland, weathered barns, the kind of sky at sunset that made people feel momentarily that the world was good and safe. The Hayes family had lived at 412 Clover Ridge Road for 3 years by the fall of 2009. Dale had grown up 30 miles south in Woodstock, Virginia, and had returned to the valley after 2 years working construction in Roanoke. Sandra, born Sandra Whitfield, had grown up in Harrisonburg before meeting Dale at a mutual friend's wedding when she was 24. They had been married for 7 years. By the accounts of those who knew them, neighbors, co-workers, members of their congregation at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, they were an unremarkable couple in the most favorable sense of that word. They coached Olivia's Pee-wee soccer team in the spring. They kept their yard tidy. They attended church most Sundays. Olivia was their only child. She was described by her kindergarten teacher at Sunset Elementary School in Woodstock as chatty and bright and very fond of drawing. She drew horses frequently. She had recently decided, according to Sandra, that she would become a veterinarian when she grew up. She was afraid of the dark and slept with a nightlight in the shape of a yellow star. She called her maternal grandmother every Sunday evening. The morning of September 14th had begun like most Monday mornings at the Hayes house. Dale rose at 5:30, showered, ate a bowl of cereal at the kitchen table and left the house at 6:15. Sandra later recalled that it had been a clear morning, cooler than it had been all week, the first real breath of autumn settling into the valley. She woke Olivia at 7:15. Olivia ate scrambled eggs and toast and drank a small glass of apple juice. She was in good spirits. Sandra remembered that Olivia had been singing a song from a children's television program while she put on her sneakers at the back door. There was no school that day. It was a teacher-in-service day at Sunset Elementary. Sandra had planned to take Olivia to her mother's house in Harrisonburg in the afternoon, but the morning was free. At approximately 8:50, Sandra allowed Olivia to go into the backyard to play while she went inside to fold a load of laundry. The back door was left open. Sandra could hear, from the laundry room at the rear of the house, the sound of the swing creaking gently and the intermittent quiet sounds of a 6-year-old child playing alone. She folded towels. She folded a set of bedsheets. She placed a stack of Olivia's small shirts and pants on the dryer lid to carry upstairs. And then she noticed the quiet. Not silence. The birds were still singing. A car passed on Clover Ridge Road, but the particular ambient noise of a child at play, the soft monologue, the scuff of sneakers on grass, the movement of the swing had stopped. Sandra Hayes walked to the back door at approximately 8:54 in the morning. The swing was still. The toy truck lay on its side beside the garden bed. The peanut butter sandwich she had carried out to Olivia 10 minutes before sat untouched on the porch steps. The apple juice had not been drunk. The yard was empty. Sandra would later tell investigators from the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office that she initially walked the perimeter of the backyard, calling Olivia's name. She checked the side yard. She checked the small garden shed where Dale kept his tools. She walked to the front of the house and looked up and down Clover Ridge Road in both directions. She called her neighbor, Patricia Hollings, at 8:59. Patricia was across the street with her front door open within 3 minutes. Sandra called 911 at 9:02. The dispatch recording would later be entered into evidence. Sandra's voice on that recording was controlled in a way that the dispatcher later described, in a statement to investigators, as the kind of calm that comes from shock. She stated her address. She stated her daughter's name, her age, and a description of what she was wearing: blue jeans, a white t-shirt with a small yellow sun printed on it, white sneakers with pink laces. She stated that she believed her daughter had been in the backyard. She stated that she did not know where her daughter was now. The first Shenandoah County Sheriff's deputy arrived at 412 Clover Ridge Road at 9:17. Within 40 minutes, the road was marked with the lights of 4 patrol vehicles, a command unit, and 2 vehicles from the Virginia State Police, who were notified and responded quickly given the age of the child. Dale Hayes was reached by phone at his workplace at 9:31. He arrived home at 10:08. Clear's throat. The swing hung still. The toy truck lay on its side. And somewhere in the morning air of Shenandoah County, the sound of a child singing had vanished without a trace. By noon on September 14, 2009, the search operation had expanded significantly. The Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office had mobilized every available deputy. The Virginia State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation had assigned 2 senior agents, Special Agent Darlene Marsh and Special Agent Craig Polton, to lead the inquiry. A volunteer search organization from neighboring Rockingham County arrived with a K-9 unit and 32 trained volunteers. A helicopter from the Virginia State Police Aviation Unit had been requested and was en route. The search parameters that afternoon extended outward from 412 Clover Ridge Road in a half-mile radius, taking in 3 adjacent neighborhoods, a stretch of light woodland to the north of the development, a small creek bed known locally as Barton's Run, and the grounds of a shuttered elementary school roughly a quarter-mile east. Officers went door to door along every street within the search perimeter. They showed photographs. They asked questions. They took notes. Within hours, the story had reached the regional news desks. A local television station out of Harrisonburg had a camera crew at the end of Clover Ridge Road by 2 in the afternoon. By that evening, Olivia's photograph, the one from her kindergarten portrait, brown pigtails, gap-toothed smile, the yellow sun shirt that Sandra had described to the dispatcher, was being displayed on every local news broadcast in the Shenandoah Valley. The community response was swift and sincere. By the following morning, more than 200 volunteers had registered at the coordination point set up at the Woodstock Volunteer Fire and Rescue Station. Church groups arrived with food and water. A local printing business produced flyers at no cost. The principal of Sunset Elementary sent a letter home to every family in the school district. For those who have ever been part of a community searching for a lost child, there is a particular kind of collective anguish that takes hold, a combination of desperate hope and creeping dread that the searchers do not speak aloud, but that lives in their eyes as they comb through tall grass and call a small name into the tree line. The K-9 units had picked up a scent trail from the backyard of the Hayes residence on the afternoon of the first day. The trail moved toward the rear property line, passed through a gap in the wooden fence that bordered the yard, and proceeded approximately 60 feet into a vacant lot behind the property before losing definition. The lead K-9 handler, a veteran with the Rockingham County unit named Tom Greer, noted in his report that the scent loss was consistent with the subject having entered a vehicle at or near that point. He also noted carefully that it was consistent with several other explanations. No vehicle had been reported parked in the lane behind the Hayes property that morning. No neighbors reported seeing an unfamiliar vehicle. No neighbors reported hearing anything unusual. Special Agent Darlene Marsh would later describe the early stages of the investigation as a picture with missing pieces in every corner. There were no fingerprints recovered from the fence gap, the yard, or the lane. There were no tire impressions. The grass in the lane had been dry and hard. It gave nothing. Investigators turned their attention, as they always do in cases involving young children, to the family. This is not a matter of suspicion so much as methodology, the concentric circles of proximity. Those closest to the child are interviewed first and most thoroughly. It is the geometry of investigation. Dale Hayes was interviewed on the afternoon of September 14th, and again in a more formal session on September 16th. He gave a consistent account. He had left for work at 6:15, had arrived at the Strasburg facility at 6:49 as confirmed by the facility's time clock, and had been on the production floor with coworkers continuously until the call from Sandra at 9:31. The time clock record was verified. Multiple coworkers confirmed his presence. His alibi was solid. Sandra Hayes was interviewed multiple times in the days following Olivia's disappearance. Her account of the morning was consistent across every telling. She had been inside for approximately 4 minutes. She had heard Olivia playing until she hadn't. She had searched the yard and called 911. And yet, those who work in investigative fields know the difference between consistent and practiced. Those who knew Sandra Hayes in the weeks following Olivia's disappearance described her grief as real and consuming. She lost weight visibly. She rarely slept. She drove the roads of Shenandoah County at night, alone, looking. She attended every press conference and community meeting. She called Special Agent Marsh twice a week for updates. But deputies whispered quietly among themselves about one small discrepancy, not in Sandra's account, in Dale's. Dale Hayes, according to his time clock record, arrived at the Strasburg facility at 6:49. The drive from 412 Clover Ridge Road to the Strasburg facility, tested by investigators at the same time of morning under similar traffic conditions, took 31 minutes. He had left the house, by Sandra's account, at 6:15. 31 minutes would place his arrival at 6:46. A 3-minute difference, a nothing discrepancy possibly, traffic, a train crossing, a slow driver ahead of him. But Special Agent Polton noted it in his case file. He noted it quietly, and then he noted something else. The odometer reading on Dale Hayes's pickup truck, taken during a cursory inspection of the vehicle on September 15th, did not correspond to the miles that should have accumulated on a round trip to Strasbourg. The discrepancy was small, less than 4 miles, and could have been explained by any number of minor detours. Polton noted it. He noted it and he said nothing yet. As October arrived and the initial search operation wound down, the case had yielded no forensic evidence, no witnesses, no confirmed sightings, no contact. The FBI's Crimes Against Children unit had been consulted and had contributed resources to the investigation for a period of 3 weeks before their primary focus shifted. The Virginia State Police maintained an open case file. By Thanksgiving of 2009, the investigation had slowed. By Christmas, it had entered that liminal space that investigators and families know too well, the open but idle phase, the waiting room between the active search and the cold case designation. Olivia Hayes was officially classified as a cold case by the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office on March 3, 2010, 170 days after she disappeared from her backyard in the early morning quiet of a September Monday. The swing still hung in the backyard of 412 Clover Ridge Road. No one had removed it. Time does not resolve grief in cases like this. It reshapes it. It changes its texture and its temperature, but it does not dissolve it. For the families of the missing, those who have no body, no confirmed fate, no closed chapter, time becomes its own particular form of uncertainty that accumulates day by day, year by year, into something nearly unbearable. Sandra and Dale Hayes remained at 412 Clover Ridge Road for 14 months after Olivia's disappearance. By most observable measures, they were trying. They attended counseling separately, at Sandra's insistence, and then together for a period. They participated in a parent support group in Harrisonburg. They maintained the appearance, at church and in their neighborhood, of a couple holding together under enormous strain. But those who knew them well, Patricia Hollings across the street, Sandra's sister Renee in Harrisonburg, the pastor at Mount Calvary Baptist, described a deterioration that was quiet and steady and almost impossible to point to in any single moment. Dale grew more withdrawn. Sandra grew more watchful, more meticulous in her routines, as though the preservation of order might ward off further loss. They ate dinner together less frequently. They attended church less regularly. Renee, Sandra's sister, would later describe what she observed in the months after Olivia's disappearance in a conversation with investigators. Sandra would call me very late at night sometimes. She would say she had had a dream about Olivia. Not the kind of dream you would expect, not a nightmare, just ordinary. Olivia eating breakfast. Olivia in the car. Ordinary. And Sandra would wake up from those ordinary dreams and feel it worse than anything. In November of 2010, the Hayes family relocated from Clover Ridge Road to a rented house in Woodstock proper, approximately 4 miles away. The move was described publicly as a practical one. The rental agreement had expired. The house on Clover Ridge had become difficult to be in. Among neighbors, the understanding was simply that the weight of that backyard, that fence gap, that still swing, had become impossible to carry. Dale Hayes continued at his position at the Strasbourg lumber facility for another 2 years. Sandra worked part-time at a dental office in Woodstock. They moved through their days with the careful, effortful normalcy of people who have learned that normalcy must be consciously performed when it can no longer be felt. In January of 2013, Sandra filed for a legal separation. The couple had been married for 11 years. The separation was, by the accounts of those close to them, quiet and without public acrimony. No third parties, no dramatic rupture. Sandra later described it to Renee as something that had been over for a long time before it was over. Dale Hayes moved into an apartment in Strasbourg. He maintained regular contact with Sandra's family for a period, attending a church event, appearing at a memorial gathering for Olivia on what would have been her 10th birthday in June of 2013. Those who observed him at that gathering described a man who seemed, somehow, less present than the grief of the occasion demanded. A man who looked at photographs of his daughter with an expression that those present struggled later to name precisely. Clears throat. For those who have ever doubted someone they love, not dramatically, not with evidence or accusation, but with a small and persistent unease that you cannot explain and cannot dismiss, you understand the kind of internal weather that Sandra Hayes was living through during those years. It is a form of knowing that precedes and outlasts all proof. It lives in the silence between two people when one of them has a secret. In the spring of 2015, Dale Hayes remarried. His new wife, a woman named Carolyn Breathwaite, was 33 years old, a schoolteacher from Front Royal. She had a daughter of her own from a previous relationship, a girl named Macy, who was 7 years old at the time of the marriage. In September of 2015, on the 6th anniversary of Olivia's disappearance, Sandra Hayes delivered a renewed public appeal to the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office. She appeared before a small gathering of local media in the parking lot of the sheriff's headquarters in Woodstock. She was composed. She spoke carefully. She said that she believed her daughter was still alive. She said that someone in the community had information they had not shared. She did not say what she believed. She did not say who she suspected. But Renee, standing beside her sister at that press conference, would later recall that Sandra had looked, for the briefest moment, in a specific direction, away from the assembled journalists, away from the cameras, toward the middle distance, with an expression that Renee could only describe as certainty. The case remained cold. The months continued to accumulate: 2016, 2017, 2018. And then in the spring of 2022, something changed. A child said something she had never said before. Macy Breathwaite Hayes was 14 years old in the spring of 2022 when she walked into the guidance counselor's office at her middle school in Front Royal, Warren County, Virginia, and asked for a private conversation. The counselor, a woman named Judith Oakes, would later describe the session in a statement to the Warren County Sheriff's Office as the most difficult conversation of my professional career. Macy had been living with her mother, Carolyn, and her stepfather, Dale Hayes, for 7 years. She was described by teachers as a quiet student, academically capable, socially reserved. She had, over the course of the prior school year, become noticeably more withdrawn. She had begun to avoid school functions. Her grades had declined. A teacher had flagged the changes and recommended a check-in with Judith Oakes. What Macy said to Judith Oakes on the morning of April 19, 2022, would take investigators nearly 48 hours to fully process for the scope of its implications. She said that her stepfather, Dale Hayes, had confided in her, not once, but in a series of conversations over a period of 2 years, that he knew where Olivia Hayes was, that Olivia was not in Shenandoah County, that Olivia was alive and living under a different name, and that Dale knew this because he had arranged it. Macy reported that Dale had told her these things in the context of what she described as trying to explain to me how to keep secrets. She said he had told her the story as a kind of lesson, an example of what a person could do, and what a person could hide if they were careful. Clears throat. Judith Oakes followed mandatory reporting protocol immediately. The Warren County Sheriff's Office was contacted at 11:47 on the morning of April 19, 2022. By 2 in the afternoon, the Virginia State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation had been notified. By 4 that afternoon, Special Agent Darlene Marsh, retired for 3 years, still reachable, still working the case in her personal files, had received a phone call she had never stopped waiting for. "When they told me a child had come forward," Marsh said in a public statement following the arrest, "I sat down in my kitchen and I stayed there for a long time. Some things take a while to land." The investigation that was reopened in the spring of 2022 moved with a focus and intensity that the original inquiry had lacked, not because the original investigators had been inadequate, but because they now had a direction. Those 3 unexplained minutes on Dale Hayes's morning commute in September 2009, that 4-mile discrepancy on his odometer, the gap in the fence that a child could walk through or be carried through in seconds. Investigators began to build the timeline backward and forward from Macy's account. They obtained cell phone records from September 14, 2009, records that had been subpoenaed and reviewed in the original investigation, but which now, read against the knowledge of what the investigators were looking for, told a different story. A brief outgoing call from Dale Hayes's mobile phone at 6:38 in the morning, between the confirmed departure time and the confirmed arrival at the Strasburg facility, to a number registered to a man named Gerald Fowler of Rockingham County, Virginia. Gerald Fowler, a name that had not appeared anywhere in the original case file, a man who had no known connection to the Hayes family, a man who, investigators discovered, had sold a property in Page County, Virginia, in October of 2009, a remote rural property with a small outbuilding, approximately 3 weeks after Olivia Hayes's disappearance. Gerald Fowler died of natural causes in 2018. He could not be questioned, but the property he had sold in 2009 could be traced, and the chain of ownership that followed it could be examined, and the people who had inhabited that property in the years between 2009 and Fowler's death could, potentially, be found. On May 11, 2022, a joint task force consisting of Virginia State Police investigators, Shenandoah County Sheriff's detectives, and FBI agents from the Richmond field office made contact with a young woman living in Stanton, Virginia. She was 19 years old. She had been raised, for reasons she had never fully understood, by a series of adults connected through informal networks of association to Gerald Fowler and his extended family. She had a name she had been given as a small child that was not her own. She had brown eyes and a small scar above her left eyebrow from what she had been told was a bicycle accident when she was very young. She could not remember the first 6 years of her life with any clarity. She had been told by various adults who cared for her over the years that her earliest memories were distorted by trauma. She had a recurring image, not quite a memory, of a yellow sun on a white shirt. A DNA sample was collected that afternoon. The results were returned on May 13, 2022, at 11:17 in the morning. Olivia Hayes had been found. She was alive. She was 19 years old. She was standing in an office in Stanton, Virginia, and the investigators in that room with her were attempting, carefully and inadequately, to explain to her what they had found. Clears throat. Dale Hayes was arrested on the morning of May 15, 2022, at his place of employment in Strasburg, the same facility where, 13 years earlier, a time clock had recorded his arrival on the morning his daughter vanished. He was taken into custody by Shenandoah County Sheriff's deputies and Virginia State Police investigators at 7:54 in the morning. He was dressed in his work uniform. He had a coffee thermos in his hand. Those who witnessed the arrest described his demeanor in varying terms. A co-worker standing nearby said that Dale Hayes looked, above all else, unsurprised. "He didn't drop the thermos," the co-worker said. "He just set it down on a nearby shelf very carefully and held out his wrists, like he'd been expecting it." Dale Hayes was charged with custodial interference, child abduction, conspiracy to commit abduction, and several additional charges that the Shenandoah County Commonwealth's attorney announced in a press conference on the afternoon of May 15th. The charges carried the weight of 13 years of accumulated evidence, rekindled attention, and a community's long unresolved grief. The public reaction was, as it often is in cases of this nature, bifurcated. Those who had always felt something was wrong, who had whispered for years, in the careful way people whisper things they cannot prove, expressed a grim and unsatisfying sense of confirmation. Those who had known Dale Hayes in the way that coworkers and neighbors know someone, as a quiet man, a reliable man, a man who showed up and did his job, struggled to reconcile the person they believed they knew with the reality that had just been revealed. Sandra Hayes was notified of the DNA confirmation and the arrest by Special Agent Marsh personally. Renee, who was with Sandra when the call came, described the moment later as beyond language. "There is no word for what my sister's face did," Renee said. "I have been trying to find the word for 2 years and I have not found it. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was something older than both of those things." In August of 2022, Dale Hayes appeared before a judge in Shenandoah County Circuit Court and entered a guilty plea to multiple counts, including the primary charge of felony child abduction. As part of the plea agreement, he provided investigators with a complete accounting of his arrangements with Gerald Fowler, the chain of individuals who had housed and raised Olivia under an assumed identity over the years, and his motivations, a protracted custody dispute that had existed only in his own planning, a belief, which he articulated in court documents with a chilling calm, that Sandra had intended to take Olivia from him in a pending separation that had not, at the time of the abduction, even begun. He was sentenced to 32 years in the Virginia correctional system. He would be eligible for consideration of release at the age of 66. In the courtroom on the day of sentencing, Sandra Hayes sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. She did not look at Dale Hayes when he entered. She did not look at him when the sentence was read. She looked at her hands, folded in her lap, and when it was over, she stood and walked out of the courtroom into the September sunlight. The same September light that had been falling on Clover Ridge Road 13 years earlier when a swing went still and a toy truck lay on its side in the grass. Olivia Hayes, who has chosen publicly to continue using the name she was given as a small child while also legally reclaiming her birth name, met with Sandra Hayes for the first time on May 19, 2022. That meeting was private. Its contents have not been shared publicly. What Sandra told a reporter from the Shenandoah Valley News 4 days afterward was this: "She has her grandmother's eyes. She always did, and she still has them." The case of Olivia Hayes does not resolve neatly, the way that a completed mystery is supposed to. A young woman is rebuilding a life and a history that was taken from her before she could form it. A mother is learning, at 45, to know a daughter she last held when she was 6. A community in the Shenandoah Valley is reckoning, quietly and imperfectly, with the years of an unresolved ache and the strange emotional complexity of an answer that brings its own sorrows alongside its relief. The lessons of this case are not comfortable ones. They ask us to sit with the knowledge that the person most capable of harming a child is often the person standing closest to that child, standing in the familiar light of an ordinary morning, setting down a coffee thermos on a shelf with practiced calm, having rehearsed, for 13 years, the performance of a grieving father. They ask us to consider what we owe to the small, persistent unease we feel and cannot name, what we owe to the questions we do not ask because we are afraid of the answers, what we owe to the children who are counting on us to ask them anyway. Shenandoah County Sheriff's investigators, when asked to comment on the resolution of the case in May of 2022, offered a statement that was brief and careful and accurate in the particular way that official statements are accurate, which is to say that it contained no lies, and it contained, also, everything that official statements are not required to say. Special Agent Darlene Marsh, speaking as a private citizen in retirement and not in any official capacity, said something different. "I kept the case file in my home office from the day I retired," she said. "Every year on September 14th I opened it. I looked at the photographs. I read my own notes. I kept thinking there was something I had almost seen and had not seen. And there was, but the answer didn't come from anything I did. It came from a child who was brave enough to say the thing she had been told never to say. Olivia Hayes is alive. She is rebuilding. She has, according to those close to her, a particular fondness for mornings, for the quality of early light, for the sound of birds, for the feeling of standing in an open space with the day still ahead of her. Some things, once they have been hidden long enough, must be spoken out loud for the world to remember they exist at all.